You were never meant to hear this. The words slip in like a whisper between worlds. Somewhere in the soil of central Virginia, beneath the roots of old tobacco fields and centuries of whitewashed lies, something stirs. Not a ghost. Not a rumor, but a truth thick, buried, and pulsing with a darkness we were taught to ignore. In 1834, a discovery shattered the illusion of civility. 47 children, locked, starved, forgotten, beneath the floorboards of a simple farmhouse in Millbrook. You won't find it on school maps, you won't read it in textbooks. Because what was uncovered there didn't just indict one family. It revealed something far older, an undercurrent of power, control, and silence that echoes into our present day. This is not a story. This is a dissection of a system, of a psyche, of a wound in the American subconscious that never closed. The Sullivan farm was not unique. That's what makes this worse. You see, what happened in that cold, creaking house wasn't just the act of a disturbed woman. It was the manifestation of a template used over and over again by institutions, leaders, and systems cloaked in piety, charity, and order. It just happened that in 1834, the mask slipped. And behind it, we saw something ancient staring back. Mother Sullivan, they called her, but the children didn't whisper that name in love. They mouthed it like a curse, barely breathing it through. Lips cracked by dehydration and fear. She didn't beat them, not often. She broke them, quietly, efficiently, with the same calm authority of a nurse drawing blood. And that's the first lesson of the farm. True evil never looks like chaos. It looks like order. It speaks softly, smiles sweetly, fills out forms and says prayers. True evil doesn't need to hide in shadows. It thrives in daylight, where no one looks twice. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered how many stories like this were buried, literally and historically, because they didn't fit the American narrative? How many farms held secrets? How many orphanages were silence factories? How many children became shadows, vanishing not into death, but into erasure? Most men are taught to fear monsters, but not the ones in nice clothes. Not the ones with records and ledgers and letters from distant cousins. That's why you're here. You're not like most men. You came for truth. And truth doesn't play fair. So we begin with the lie. The biggest lie of all, that horrors like this are isolated. The Sullivan farm wasn't an anomaly. It was a blueprint. A quiet experiment in breaking young minds into obedience, in turning children into currency, into cattle, into data. And once you understand how it was done, you'll see it everywhere. In systems, in schools, in screens, in churches, in corporations. But let's stay in the dirt for now. Let's sit in that cold Virginia basement. Let the darkness soak in, because only by breathing it in can we learn how to break the cycle. Ezra Sullivan didn't build a house. He built a vault. Stone by stone, layer by layer, and each brick held something worse than blood, intention. This wasn't madness. It was method. The basement wasn't an afterthought. It was the nucleus. The rest of the farm? A costume, a decoy. Paint over rotting walls. Think deeper. This was a production line, a machine. Each child a cog, some too weak to spin. Others replaced, disposed of, forgotten. But something strange happened inside that basement. Something no sheriff's report could explain. Even chained, even starved, the children had patterns, rituals, names they whispered when no one was listening. They drew symbols in dust. They scratched marks into the stone. They rocked in sync, as if obeying something, someone. What were they doing? Communicating, remembering, or resisting? You see, this is where the story begins to twist. Because what was buried wasn't just flesh. It was information. And what those children knew, or what was done to make them forget, is more disturbing than the chains themselves. So we dig. We don't look away. We dig. This is not entertainment. This is excavation. The deeper we go, the more the air changes. You'll feel it soon. That pressure in your chest. That sensation that something is watching from behind the veil of facts. Good. Let it in. You're not just hearing history. You're being rewritten by it. And by the time we finish this descent, you'll never see the world the same way again. Do you hear that? That hum beneath your thoughts. Like a memory that doesn't belong to you. That's not your fear. That's inherited. That's what happens when you awaken ancestral knowing. The kind that's been screamed into basements and buried beneath courthouses. You're not just listening. You're remembering. Now, let's go deeper. April 8th, 1834. 2 men. A farmhouse. A door sealed in iron and dread. Sheriff Benjamin Crawford and Deputy Marcus Webb didn't walk into a house that morning. They walked into a ritual. A system so intricately concealed, it took 2 decades of silence to maintain. But once the first lock was snapped and the door groaned open, reality began to fracture. The air turned acidic. The smell was not death. Death is final. This was the smell of decay, caught in a loop, like something kept alive just to suffer. Lantern light revealed the impossible. A chamber beneath the earth that didn't match the footprint of the house. It spread like veins in all directions, stone corridors, carved tunnels, cells, and in those cells, children. Not crying, not pleading, just watching. Their eyes didn't say, "Help me." They said, "Why did it take you so long?" This wasn't some spontaneous crime of passion. This was a curated ecosystem, an institution built beneath a lie. And like every institution that feeds off control, it hid in virtue, orphan care, relief of the poor, sanctuary for the forgotten. Sound familiar? You've heard those words before. We all have. They hang like banners above programs, charities, wars, but they don't mean what they sound like. In the Sullivan basement, the children had numbers, etched into iron tags worn like dog collars, their names replaced, erased. In the ledgers found near the furnace, each child had a record: height, age, compliance rating, potential for resale or retraining. That's right, resale. What authorities uncovered was not just a prison. It was a supply chain. Some children disappeared from the records. Where were they sent? Who received them? No one ever gave a name, because names would connect the dots. And those dots led upward, not downward. You want forbidden truth? Hear it. This wasn't just the act of a deranged woman. This was commerce, and someone was buying. Now listen carefully, because this is where the story fractures into a mirror. What you see here is not confined to 1834. Control always wears a smile, always calls itself safety, always says it's for the children. Look around you now. Where are the basements today? What if I told you they're digital, invisible, hidden, in policy and platform instead of brick and dirt? What if I told you that the same principles used to chain those children are being used now, at scale, with precision? You don't need iron anymore. You need addiction. You need distraction. You need division. Because a man too scattered to think clearly will never see the cage he's in. And what they learned in that Virginia house is this: you don't break a person all at once. You do it slowly, silently, with care. Step 1, remove identity. Step 2, control environment. Step 3, flood the system with rules that change constantly. Step 4, make escape feel impossible. That's not horror fiction. That's modern life. The Sullivan children weren't just victims. They were prototypes, blueprints for future control systems. Systems that would evolve from shackles to screens, from dungeons to data. But let's stay in the cellar a moment longer, because something else was found down there: etchings on the walls. Symbols not of English or Latin origin. Old markings, geometric, ritualistic. Sheriff Crawford didn't know what to make of them. But later investigators recognized some of them as sigils, archaic signs used in occult practices tied to control and containment of energy. Why would those be in a basement full of children? And why did so many of those children, upon rescue, speak of a mother who watched them not just from above, but from inside their dreams? What kind of woman does this? What kind of force enables it? Because let's be clear, this wasn't about money. It wasn't about madness. This was about mastery. The mastery of breaking the human will. And Constant Sullivan didn't act alone. No one builds something like this in secret unless someone's protecting them, funding them, using them. So now, you must ask, who knew? Who looked the other way? Who paid in silence? Who benefited? Because when one link in the chain breaks, the whole mechanism begins to tremble. And here you are, holding the blueprint. Still think this was just about one woman? Still think this is history? No, this is present. This is pattern. This is the part of the machine they never wanted you to see. And if you're still watching, then you've already crossed the threshold. Now it's time to decide. Will you climb back up to the light? Or do you want to go all the way down? Because I'll take you, but you don't come back the same. Asterisk. Asterisk. They say history begins with writing. But what if the truest history was washed away? Long before the ink of the first Sumerian tablet dried under the sun, there was a sound, a whisper carried by stone and blood. A story etched not with letters, but with scars in the land and in the minds of those who survived what came before, because something did come before the pyramids, before the ziggurats, before the myths we were taught to dismiss. There was a world. It thrived. And then it drowned. In nearly every ancient culture, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from the highlands of Tibet to the sunken legends of the Aboriginal. Dreamtime, one chilling thread remains eerily consistent. The flood, not a gentle rising of the seas, not a symbolic tale. A cataclysm. Something so immense it scarred memory itself. A purge of the past. And of those who remembered. The epic of Gilgamesh, older than the Bible, tells of a man warned by the gods to build a boat, not for animals, but for truth. The book of Genesis echoes the same, as does the tale of Manu in India, Deucalion in Greece, and Unu Pachacuti in the Andes. But what exactly was being washed away? In 1968, strange stones were photographed off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas. Rectangular, aligned, massive. They called it a natural formation, but a diver with geological training said otherwise. These blocks didn't fall like that, he muttered. They were placed. He died the following year. Heart attack. Age 41. No autopsy. This wasn't an isolated finding. From the Yonaguni Monument in Japan's submerged coastlines, to the ruins beneath Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, to sonar scans revealing buried shapes off the coasts of India, Cuba, and Malta. The story was the same. Civilization had existed and was buried under sea in silence, and every time a new piece was brought into light, it vanished back into shadow, not because it was disproven, but because it didn't fit the story. You see, the narrative we're taught is neat, linear, clean. Hunter-gatherers gives farmers, gives tribes, gives cities, gives empires, gives U.S., but anomalies keep surfacing. Literally carved stones older than agriculture. Maps showing ice-free Antarctic coasts before we discovered Antarctica. Mathematics encoded in temple ruins beyond modern capabilities. And always a flood, who taught the ancients how to build with megaliths that modern cranes can't lift? Who gave them knowledge of the stars thousands of years before telescopes? Why do so many myths talk about the sky people, the shining ones, or those who fell from heaven, only to disappear in the wake of the flood? And most damning of all, why were the survivors hunted? In the shadowed corners of forbidden texts, there are hints. The Zohar speaks of angels who taught mankind secrets they were not meant to know. The Book of Enoch, banned from the Bible, describes watchers who descended and sired hybrid offspring, beings of great knowledge and great arrogance. Their punishment? A cleansing, a flood, a reset. But some survived. And their knowledge became dangerous. It's said that in the aftermath of the flood, a few men emerged bearing strange understanding of metallurgy, architecture, healing, and even time itself. They were called gods, kings, demons, depending on who told the story. In Egypt, they were the Shemsu Hor, followers of Horus, priest kings said to predate the pharaohs by thousands of years. In Mesopotamia, they were the Apkallu, half-man, half-fish sages who rebuilt society. In Mesoamerica, they were Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha, bearded, pale-skinned bringers of law and knowledge. All different names, same arrival, same mission, to reseed a world that had been wiped clean. But over time, their message was corrupted. It's whispered that those who held this post-flood knowledge split into two factions. One believed in sharing it, rebuilding a better world. The other believed in control. They would teach kings, but not the people. They would build temples, but with secret chambers. They would encode knowledge, not to preserve it, but to gatekeep it. And so began the cult of the eye, not a religion, not a tribe, an ideology, a belief that true power was not ruling nations, but shaping what nations believe. And the first step was simple: erase the past. They buried old temples beneath newer ones. They destroyed libraries. They silenced the oral traditions. They created pantheons to confuse the origin stories. And in time, they wrote the victor's version of history, one without the flood, one without the forbidden knowledge, one without the memory of a time when mankind walked beside something other. What was once universal myth became coincidence. What was once sacred geometry became decoration. What was once knowledge became legend. But not all was lost. In secret societies, fragments were kept. The Druids, the Magi, the Brotherhood of the Snake, the 9 unknown men of Ashoka's India, the keepers of Alexandria before the flames. They passed whispers through stone, through bloodlines, through architecture. The Great Pyramid was not a tomb, it was a machine. The Ark of the Covenant was not a chest, it was a capacitor. Sphinx was not carved by pharaohs, it was ancient before the Nile even flowed where it does now. Every piece that remains was meant to speak, and we silenced it. But sometimes something slipped through. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd stumbled upon something in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. Stone circles, carvings of animals and symbols, 12,000 years old, at least. Twice as old as Stonehenge, older than farming, built with precision and purpose. Mainstream historians scrambled. How could hunter-gatherers build this? How could a society without agriculture organize labor, geometry, and sacred symbolism? Answer: they did single quotes someone before them did. Göbekli Tepe wasn't a beginning, it was a memory, a shrine built atop even older truths, a message meant to outlast the next flood, and perhaps the next cover. Up. Because here's the twist: the flood wasn't just water. It was a strategy, a flood of time, of confusion, of rewriting, destroying not just buildings, but belief, making sure that, when survivors of the next cataclysm dig through the mud of our era, they'll think we were the first. Just as we believed those before us were myths. And so history repeats. The truth is buried, the truth-tellers are ridiculed, and the cycle resets, clean, controlled, and silent. But tonight, you've heard it, a ripple across still water, a shadow moving behind the curtain. The flood didn't erase everything, and maybe, just maybe, you were meant to remember. They say the truth will set you free, but what if the truth has been locked away, deep beneath marble floors, guarded by silence, centuries of power, and a fear older than any book. Beneath the majestic grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica, under gold ceilings, divine frescoes, and the echo of prayer, lies a vault more impenetrable than any fortress. A place spoken of only in whispers. A library, yes, but also a tomb for ideas, for revelations, for a version of history we were never meant to read. This is the Vatican's secret archives. Not a conspiracy theory, not folklore. This place is real, stretching over 53 miles of shelving. This underground labyrinth contains over 35,000 volumes, documents so ancient, so sensitive that even popes are said to fear what lies within. A place where letters from Galileo to the Inquisition sit next to papal correspondences with Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. Where exorcism transcripts, codices of forbidden rituals, and apocalyptic visions are not myth, but filed, sealed, and cataloged by a system built to outlive nations. But what are they hiding? We're told the archives are a matter of preservation, a sanctuary of holy memory. But to access them, you must write a formal request in Latin, declare your research decades in advance, and even then, you are not allowed to photograph, copy, or touch the most sensitive texts. Much of the catalog remains unindexed, unknown, unseen. Why such secrecy? From the institution that claims to be the moral light of the world. The more you trace the shadows behind the church's walls, the more they seem to dance, not away from sin, but toward power. You begin to see how religion, politics, war, and control have always formed an unholy alliance. Inside the archives, there are said to be lost gospels, scriptures that tell different stories of Jesus, his teachings, and even of Mary Magdalene. These texts were declared heretical, destroyed in public. But what if copies were hidden here, locked away because they offered a version of the divine that threatened the church's monopoly? There's a letter, verified, from King Henry VIII, begging for his marriage to be annulled. There are records of the Inquisition, blood-soaked names of those tortured for their beliefs. But perhaps the most chilling whisper comes from the prophecy of the popes, an apocalyptic vision allegedly penned by Saint Malachi in the 12th century. It predicted every pope. And according to the final lines, the last pope will oversee the destruction of Rome and the judgment of the world. The last pope. Many believe that's the man in white right now, but it gets darker. Declassified documents suggest the Vatican knew more than it admitted during World War II, that corridors of power ran not just through Washington and Berlin, but through Rome. The Vatican allegedly helped high-ranking Nazis escape through the so-called Ratlands, secret routes to South America, in exchange for silence, gold, and protection. Did the Church knowingly aid mass murderers? Or was it simply trying to preserve itself at any cost? The line between faith and fear begins to blur, and then there are the rumors no one dares say aloud, that deep within the archives lie tomes bound in human skin, books of demonology, and evidence of extraterrestrial contact. That the Vatican has a device called the chronovisor, a machine built by scientists and monks in the 20th century that could view events from the past. That it was tested, used, and then sealed away when what it showed became too terrifying for the world to know. Fiction or forbidden knowledge. One priest-turned-whistleblower claimed he had seen records of a hidden chamber beneath the archives, containing an ossuary not of saints but of others, creatures, bones not quite human, skeletons with elongated skulls, sealed behind holy symbols meant to suppress something. He died in a fire a week later. His journals vanished. Could these be the remains of Nephilim, the fallen ones, mentioned in the Book of Enoch, cast down to earth in rebellion? The same beings other cultures called Anunnaki or sky gods. Remember, the Church removed the Book of Enoch from the Bible. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. One meant to bury a cosmic truth, that humanity may not be alone, that we were never alone. Why would the Vatican want to hide that? Because if people knew that we were the descendants of beings from beyond the stars, or that the war between angels and demons was more literal than symbolic, the entire structure of faith, guilt, sin, and obedience might collapse. People would stop kneeling. They might start asking questions. No. Religion could answer. Control would slip. You begin to see that the archive is not a library. It's a prison for dangerous ideas. And the guards? Not just cardinals or priests, but elite archivists trained in linguistics, secrecy, and misdirection. Some say these custodians belong to an inner circle even popes cannot access. A shadow papacy within the Vatican itself. They choose what survives, and more disturbingly, what dies. What about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Or the missing books of the Bible, the Gospel of Judas, the Acts of Paul, the Gospel of Mary? Each tells a version of the truth deemed unacceptable. Heresy. Why? Because they do not preach obedience. They speak of inner power, of divine connection without intercession, of sacred femininity, of cosmic beings who shaped humanity not as punishment, but as experiment. Imagine what would happen if people believed God was not a father, but an alien scientist. Or if Jesus preached not only salvation, but the awakening of human DNA. Now you begin to understand why the archives are buried, not to preserve faith, but to protect empire. From the ancient tablets of Babylon, to the scrolls of Qumran, to the coded messages of Da Vinci's notebooks, it all points to a pattern. Knowledge has always been hunted, censored, and rewritten by those who fear its consequences. And no institution has wielded this power more globally, more secretly, and more effectively than the Vatican. But cracks are appearing. Leaks, whispers, anonymous testimony. In the age of digital transparency, some believe the time of secret libraries is ending, that the truths inside the Vatican's stone vaults will rise to the surface, like bones after rain. But ask yourself, if the truth were finally revealed, could the world survive it? Or would chaos bloom from its release, like the final seal broken in Revelation? The Vatican's secrets are not just historical. They are existential, and they are waiting behind locked doors. In ink that still bleeds. They told you symbols were harmless, just design, just art, just coincidence. But what if they were instructions? Not for machines, but for you. Look around. That pyramid on the dollar bill. The all-seeing eye. The twin pillars flanking government buildings. The checkerboard floors beneath the feet of kings, popes, presidents. Do you think that's random? It isn't. These are echoes of a language that predates Latin, older than Sanskrit, more powerful than any alphabet. A language not spoken, but carved, embedded, etched into stone, metal, ritual, and memory. It is the language of control. One that doesn't ask for your permission, only your unconscious obedience. The elite know this, because they wrote it. Across time and space, ancient symbols have been carried forward, reshaped, and rebranded, but never erased. The winged sun of Babylon becomes the eagle of Rome, becomes the crest of America. The Ouroboros slithers through Norse, Egyptian, and Gnostic myth as a symbol of the eternal cycle life. Death, rebirth, and control. These are not just images. They are keys to unlocking allegiance, obedience, silence. Let's start with the obelisk. It towers in Vatican City. It pierces the skyline of Washington, D.C. It stands proudly in London. These monolithic spires are Egyptian in origin, tributes to the sun god Ra. But now, they've been co-opted as antennas projecting ancient authority over modern minds. Each one of them is placed in alignment, their shadows crossing ley lines that trace energy grids most never see. These structures act as symbolic dominators, erected to cast the shadow of empire across time. They knew geometry. They knew resonance. They knew that form is power. The ancient mystery schools, from Pythagoras to Thoth, taught that everything has frequency. That geometry is sacred. The triangle, divine. The circle, infinite. The square, earthbound. Combine them, and you summon forces that bend minds and shape belief. What is a pentagram, really? Hollywood shows it glowing red beneath demonic rituals. But its origin is rooted in balance, the 5 elements: earth, air, fire, and spirit. But flip it upside down, you invert spirit. You trap divinity beneath base matter. That's not just artistic. That's an invocation. They've used these inversions for centuries. Turn the sacred into a joke. Hide the real power in plain sight. And call those who notice ... crazy. But you're not crazy. Have you ever looked at a corporate logo and felt something off? That's by design. Consider the Ouroboros a snake eating its own tail. Ancient alchemists saw it as a symbol of unity and eternal return. Now, you find it in modern psychology, advertising, and elite symbolism. Not because it's trendy, but because it triggers a deep unconscious familiarity. Like something buried in your ancestral memory. This is psychological coding. Branding for your soul. The banking systems use arches: Gothic, Roman, Freemasonic. Arches signify gateways. In ancient rites, to walk through one was to be transformed. To be initiated. Do you remember walking through the double glass doors of your first bank? Did it feel ceremonial? It was. Even the number of pillars matters. 2 pillars, Jachin and Boaz from the Temple of Solomon. Masculine and feminine, mercy and severity, knowledge and strength. They appear again and again, from Masonic lodges to Supreme Courts to university entrances. They're not just decorative. They are an encoded message. You are entering sacred space. Obey its rules. Let's take the checkerboard floor, one of the most widely replicated symbols in elite architecture. Black and white squares, order and chaos. Light and dark. In Masonic tradition, it represents duality. The stage on which humanity walks, unaware that every step is part of a performance. You are the actor. They are the director. Now imagine this. Floor beneath the throne of a judge. Or the seat of a president. Still think it's just tile? Let's go deeper into language itself. Words are spells. That's why it's called spelling. Ever wonder why lawyers practice law in a court? Because it's a ritual. A game of power where you are summoned, yes, summoned like a spirit. Do you stand under this court's authority? That's not legalese. That's ritual language asking for your spiritual consent. They don't take power. They trick you into giving it. Even the word government comes from Latin roots. Gubernare, to control. Mens, the mind. Government equals mind control. Not conspiracy. Etymology. Words have been weaponized. The elite use gematria, the assigning of numerical value to letters, to encode layers of meaning beneath everyday language. 666 isn't just a number, it's a signature. A symbol of man trying to become God, of systems replacing the soul. You see it in barcode algorithms, in patent numbers, in dates of historic ritualistic events. They believe numbers hold vibration, and those vibrations shape reality. We live in a constructed dream, a spell cast through symbols, reinforced through repetition. Now ask yourself why the same geometric shapes appear in religions that never met. The same birds, the same stars, the same serpents, because someone has been guiding the narrative across millennia, shaping your perception before you had a chance to choose. Do you think it's coincidence that the Vatican's Key Plaza is shaped like a keyhole? That it aligns perfectly with ancient Roman temples? That every U.S. president visits the crownless queen in London before assuming true power? This isn't about politics. It's about ritual geography. Washington, D.C., London. Vatican City. 3 city-states that operate outside the laws of their nations. 3 points. A triangle. The trinity of control. Each of these places is adorned with obelisk, dome, temple. The masculine. The feminine. The divine union. It's alchemical. Not just symbolic, functional, and this is why you've been distracted. Fed meaningless news, addicted to noise. Divided by design. Because if you ever pause to see the architecture of your enslavement, you might begin to decode it. And if you decode it, you might start to wake others up. And if enough awaken, the spell breaks. So they mock symbols in media. They distort ancient truths into pop culture references. They invert sacred signs into demonic emblems. But the truth is they still use them. Because symbols are ancient tech that rewires the psyche. That shapes thought before it's even conscious. You were never taught this in school. Because you weren't meant to see the language of your masters. But now you do. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. Next time you walk into a courthouse, a church, a bank, look around, see the symbols. Count the pillars, trace the geometry. Ask why. Ask who. Because only those who understand the code can begin to write there. Own. And in that moment, you take back something they never wanted you to own, your own will. What if your thoughts were never truly yours? What if, from the moment you opened your eyes each morning, every desire, fear, ambition, or hesitation had already been engineered embedded in you by unseen hands? Not through brute force or overt commands, but something far more insidious. The illusion of free will, carefully crafted by those who never needed chains. They only needed silence. And time. This is the domain where war isn't waged with guns, but with ideas. Where control doesn't wear a uniform or carry a badge. It whispers. It teaches. It programs. And it always begins with belief. In the shadow of global conflicts there arose a quiet obsession inside the world's most powerful institutions, the mind itself. If you could break it, bend it, or build it, then armies were unnecessary, borders became irrelevant. Control would be total and invisible. The American intelligence community was one of the first to step boldly into this darkness. In the 1950s, the Central Intelligence Agency authorized a classified project under the coding name Ultra. Officially, it was a psychological research program designed to understand the effects of mind-altering substances. Unofficially, it was the state-sanctioned desecration of the human soul. The CIA believed the mind was a battlefield, and they were determined to win it. They used LSD, not as medicine or escape, but as a weapon administered without consent. To civilians, mental patients, prisoners, and even their own agents. Some were dosed in public settings. Others were kept in rooms for weeks, fed psychedelics, deprived of sleep, subjected to blaring noises or total silence until they broke. These weren't isolated experiments. They were deliberate protocol steps in a psychological war waged on the very people they were meant to protect. The human psyche, they discovered, was disturbingly malleable. Memory could be erased. Identity could be rewritten. Morality could be dissolved like sugar in water. And when the results got too horrific, the records were destroyed. Thousands of documents ordered to be shredded in a single day. The evidence of trauma erased, but not forgotten. Survivors remembered. Whistleblowers leaked, and fragments of the truth bled out into the public like ink in water. But Ultra was never truly shut down. It was simply renamed, reassigned, fragmented and absorbed into even deeper projects, where funding didn't require oversight, and morality was an obsolete concern. While America probed the chemical frontiers of the mind across the Atlantic, another machine was perfecting mass, psychological control on a far broader scale. It started in 1921. Quietly, in a small building in London. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations was formed under the guise of studying shell-shocked soldiers after World War I. What it became was something far more influential, an epicenter of social engineering, where minds weren't just studied, they were sculpted. Tavistock wasn't about treating trauma. It was about understanding how trauma could be used. They discovered that when populations experience widespread emotional shocks, wars, assassinations, economic collapses, they become more susceptible to suggestion. Old belief systems shatter. In the aftermath, the population becomes programmable. This realization became the cornerstone of modern propaganda. Tavistock's findings quietly informed everything from advertising to political campaigning, from Hollywood narratives to global news cycles. If you control the emotional landscape of a society, you don't need to coerce its behavior. You just nudge it. Gently, repeatedly, until the abnormal feels normal. Until resistance feels pointless. Trauma was no longer a symptom. To cure it became a method. It's why disaster cycles dominate the news. Why the music industry, film, and media echo the same dissonant themes. A constant loop of fear, desire, and identity confusion. Not because the world is naturally this chaotic, but because confusion makes you easier to manage. You can't fight what you can't name. And Tavistock ensured the language of control was buried beneath 1,000 layers of entertainment, academic jargon, and clinical indifference. But even Tavistock was only one node in a larger web. Hidden beneath layers of military-industrial partnerships, university research grants, and philanthropic foundations lies a centuries-old effort to seize the levers of human thought. From early behavioralists like B.F. Skinner to modern neuroscientific research funded by defense departments, the goal remained unchanged: predict the mind and then direct it. We are living in the aftermath of that mission. Entire generations have grown up immersed in environments designed not for education, but indoctrination. Schooling models that prize obedience over curiosity. Media systems that reduce reality to digestible fictions. Algorithms that feed us only what reinforces our biases, trapping us inside invisible echo chambers, comfortable, compliant, and blind. But the most devastating control mechanism wasn't technology. It was language. Because if you can redefine the meaning of a word, you can control how a person thinks. Change freedom to mean submission. Make truth subjective. Paint questioning as dangerous. And before long, entire populations defend the very systems that enslave them. This is the genius of soft control. There are no bars, no guards, no rebellion, just endless scrolling, endless compliance. Yet behind this machinery of manipulation, there is something even darker. A core understanding that certain symbols, rituals, and psychological patterns can bypass the conscious mind altogether. The ancient world knew this well. Mystery schools, esoteric orders, occult traditions, these were never just spiritual playgrounds. They were instruction manuals in the art of influence. Today, those teachings haven't disappeared. They've been rebranded. Ritual became pop culture. Symbolism became marketing. The altar became the screen. And the audience became the sacrifice. Consider the recurring imagery, the all-seeing eye, the pyramid, the duality of light and dark, the mirror. These aren't just aesthetic choices. They're sigils, carriers of ancient meanings reactivated through repetition. And the more we see them, the less we question them, until they become part of the unconscious architecture of belief. This is psychological sorcery dressed in modern clothes. It explains why so many public rituals, from music award performances to political inaugurations, carry eerie echoes of initiation ceremonies. Why trauma is ritualized through mass media. Why certain events feel less like news and more like theater. Because they are, and we, unwittingly, are the participants. What once took secret societies years of grooming and ceremonial preparation can now be achieved through a 30-second clip that reaches 3 billion screens. The mechanisms have changed. The manipulation has not. But to understand the true depth of this control, we must look beyond psychology into the forbidden union of science and the occult. There exists a hidden doctrine known in whispers as psychotronics, or bioenergetics that claims the human mind is not just a processor, but a receiver. That thought itself is a frequency. And if that's true, then it can be hijacked, distorted, or jammed like any other signal. Experiments in the 1970s and 80s explored these frontiers: remote viewing, telepathic warfare, directed energy fields aimed at influencing mood, thought, and even decision-making. Officially, the results were inconclusive. Unofficially, the research never stopped, because if thought can be broadcast, then freedom becomes an illusion. The tragedy is not that such control exists. The tragedy is that most will never believe it does. They'll scoff, roll their eyes, retreat to comforting narratives. Because to accept this truth requires confronting a more terrifying one, that your mind, your sanctuary, your compass, your last refuge may no longer be yours. And yet, all is not lost. For those who see through the illusion, even faintly, a path begins to emerge, one not of rage but awareness, not of panic but preparation. It starts with a question, simple, piercing, dangerous: whose thoughts are these? And once asked, it cannot be unasked. They were never meant to be worshipped. Those figures etched in stone, painted in gold, and elevated to the heavens, they were not gods, not in the way we've been taught. They were symbols, vessels, interfaces between something ancient and unknowable, and the fragile minds of those who beheld them. And what if the divine, as we know it, was not a gift, but a leash? The earliest civilizations weren't just building temples, they were building containment zones. Structures not for prayer, but for control. From the ziggurats of Sumer to the pyramids of Egypt, each monument was calibrated with precision, aligned with stars, seasons, and some say, with dimensions beyond this one. But why? What were they trying to reach? Or more disturbingly, trying to keep out? In the heart of Mesopotamia, long before Abrahamic religions carved the moral frameworks of the modern world, the Sumerians spoke of beings called the Anunnaki. Not metaphor, not myth. Kings, priests, and scribes documented their interactions as historical fact. These entities, descending from the stars, demanded tribute, obedience, and absolute reverence. And what did they offer in return? Knowledge, laws, civilization. But at what cost? The gift of civilization came wrapped in blood. The Anunnaki demanded kingship be lowered from heaven, establishing the divine right of rulers, the idea that power comes not from the people, but from those chosen by the stars. It was a contract, a transaction. The ruling elite, in exchange for their thrones, would act as earthly proxies. The gods would retreat, but their will would echo through thrones, crowns, and scepters. Theocracy in disguise, and the pattern spread. Egypt crowned pharaohs as living gods. Mesoamerican rulers sacrificed thousands to appease forces they could not name. The Chinese Mandate of Heaven ordained emperors as the celestial order's human anchor. In each case, a single message was drilled into the hearts of the masses. Obedience was not political, it was sacred. But who were these gods, really? Some scholars, long dismissed as fringe, have proposed that these early deities weren't imagined but encountered. Entities of immense power, not divine but technological. Advanced beyond our comprehension, appearing to ancient minds as omnipotent beings. Arthur C. Clarke once said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." If the Anunnaki, or others like them, were interdimensional travelers, bioengineers, or manipulators of reality itself, then the lines between God, alien, and master begin to blur. And if they came once, why wouldn't they return? Worse still, what if they never left? The symbols persisted. From Sumerian winged discs to the Eye of Horus, from the labyrinths of Minoan Crete to the hidden chambers beneath Vatican City. These were not relics of superstition, they were signposts. Warnings, coordinates in a map of invisible dominion, And then came monotheism, a supposed simplification. One God to rule all. But the consolidation of divine power didn't liberate humanity. It locked the system. One voice, one truth, one law. All heresy, dissent, deviation, burned, buried, or banished. Religions didn't erase the old powers. They absorbed them, repackaged them, rebranded the old pantheons into saints, demons, angels, but the structure remained intact. The priest became the programmer. The altar became the interface. Faith became firmware. And the great secret of priesthood was never revelation. It was access. Behind every curtain, in every ancient mystery school, were whispers that the divine could be summoned, channeled, even bargained with. Not through purity, but through ritual. Not through morality, but through sacrifice. From the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece to the blood-soaked altars of the Aztecs, from the Hermetic traditions of Egypt to the Kabbalists of medieval Europe. Initiates sought one thing: direct communion. Not to worship, but to wield. And some succeeded. Alchemists spoke of spirits trapped in metals, philosophers of demons whispering in dreams, and witches of entities demanding pacts in the dead of night. The line between mystic and madman blurred. But throughout, one theme echoed. Knowledge always came at a price, because some doors open both ways. The Vatican, keeper of the largest hidden archive on earth, has long been rumored to possess documents that tell of ancient rituals predating Christianity, artifacts that hum with a presence, and texts written in languages not of this world. Why keep them locked away? For safety or for secrecy? And why, throughout history, have so many truth-seekers vanished? From Giordano Bruno, who spoke of infinite worlds and was burned alive, to Nikola Tesla, whose inventions flirted with unseen energies and whose papers disappeared after death. From John Dee, advisor to Queen Elizabeth, who claimed to speak with angels using obsidian mirrors, to Aleister Crowley, who summoned beings in Egypt and declared contact with an entity named Iwas. Each of them pierced the veil, and each paid the price. Because to touch the divine is to court madness. There's a reason ancient temples required initiates to undergo purification, fasting, sensory deprivation. They weren't just preparing the body, they were bracing the mind. For beyond the veil lies a truth too vast, too alien, too unfiltered for the human psyche to contain. The ancients understood something we've forgotten. That truth, raw and unmediated, is not a liberation, it's a shattering. And so we built religions, myths, and moral codes not to reveal the divine, but to protect us from it, to soften it, filter it, turn it into something we could live with, something we could bow to without losing our minds. But beneath every holy book, every sacred text, lies a hidden layer, a code, a cipher, a whisper in the silence. That the gods we worship may not be creators at all, but colonizers. That our myths are not metaphors, but maps. That humanity has been the subject of an experiment, spiritual, biological, and psychological, for thousands of years. And the experiment is ongoing. Every time we kneel, every time we obey, every time we accept without questioning, the signal strengthens. The system resets, and the watchers watch, because belief is the most powerful form of energy. It shapes reality, binds communities, moves armies, ends empires. And those who can control belief can control the world. So ask yourself, what do you believe? And more importantly, who taught you to believe it? When the veil is lifted, it doesn't fall away quietly. It shreds, because beneath the surface of every historical event we're taught to memorize, beneath every war, every monument, every tale of triumph, there lies a darker thread, sewn by unseen hands. This thread doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't reveal itself in textbooks or documentaries, but in symbols left behind, patterns repeated, and bloodlines that never die. This is where mythology and empire intersect, where divine right is nothing more than a carefully polished illusion, where kings are not born, but bred designed like weapons. The question isn't whether ancient civilizations held hidden knowledge. The real question is, who inherited it? When empires fell, the wisdom of their priests, architects, and sorcerers didn't vanish. It was carried smuggled through generations, hidden in vaults beneath cities, encrypted in rituals, and sealed inside societies that operated in the dark. Egypt's last magi didn't disappear. They were absorbed. Babylon's star maps weren't destroyed. They were copied. The fire that once illuminated sacred temples was transported into secret chambers, behind stone doors that only opened to blood and oath. Consider the Medici of Florence. To the public, they were bankers, patrons of the arts, civilized men of culture. But behind the gilded paintings and Renaissance smiles, they were gatekeepers, initiates of older mysteries. They traced their line not from Rome or Greece, but from Etruscan cults that predated even the earliest city-states. They understood symbols the world had long forgotten. They financed explorers, not to discover new lands, but to retrieve old ones. Lands written about in forbidden maps, places where power once flowed like water, and gods once walked among men. Christopher Columbus did not accidentally find America. He carried with him ancient navigational charts passed down from Phoenician mystics and Moorish astronomers. He was searching for the remnants of a forgotten empire, fragments of Atlantis cloaked in jungle and sand. And he wasn't the only one. The conquistadors who followed courts, Pizarro, Balboa, were armed not just with steel, but with prophecy. They came not to discover, but to harvest. To seize golden idols, solar calendars, and serpent-laced temples, because they believed these held keys to immortality and time. What the history books call colonization was, in truth, a global scavenger hunt for pieces of a lost puzzle. The Ark of the Covenant, the Spear of Destiny, the Emerald Tablets, artifacts whispered about in secret rooms and alchemical scrolls. Whether you believe in their literal power doesn't matter. The elite do. And they have spent centuries chasing them, not for museums, but for rituals. Take the Vatican, for example. A religious institution on the surface, yes. But what lies beneath its foundation is older than Christianity itself. Catacombs that stretch for miles, libraries guarded by exorcists, chambers that hold the bones of saints alongside the scrolls of Egyptian necromancers. Within those hidden archives rest forbidden gospels, books removed from the Bible, not because they were false, but because they were true. Truths too dangerous to be read aloud. Truths that declare man as divine, death as a doorway, and the gods as not absent, but waiting. Even the architecture betrays the secret. St. Peter's Basilica is a cathedral, but it is also a sundial, a celestial clock, an alchemical code in stone. Its designers were not just artists, they were initiates. Bernini, Michelangelo, Bramante, each of them encoded geometry, numerology, and astrological alignments into their works. And they did not act alone. They answered to something older than the Pope, something that whispers behind the crimson robes and jeweled rings. This is not unique to Rome. Every capital city is a shrine. Washington, D.C., with its obelisks, pentagrams, and Masonic cornerstones, is not just a seat of power. It is a ritual grid engineered to channel energy, to invoke control, to mimic the stars. Why else would the Capitol dome mirror the Pantheon? Why do the streets align with solstices and equinoxes? Why are its founders, Franklin, Jefferson, Washington, all tied to secret fraternities that revere Egyptian, Greek, and Babylonian gods beneath Christian masks? Because the past never died. It simply changed costumes. Modern governance is not born from democracy. It is a continuation of priesthoods. The high councils of today wear suits, but they speak in the same language as their ancestors: control. Through fear, illusion, and blood. Their rituals are no longer public sacrifices. They are economic crashes, staged pandemics, engineered chaos. And always they offer the same solution. Surrender your freedom, and they will grant you safety. But look closer. Every catastrophe is a ritual. Every televised event is a performance. Every emergency, an invocation. The tower falls. The crowd screams. The phoenix rises from the ashes, and with it, new laws, new wars, new gods. The cycles repeat because they are scripted to. Those who write the scripts do not seek your consent. They assume your ignorance. Yet even among them, there's hierarchy. At the top are not presidents or kings, those are actors. Puppets with golden chains. The true architects remain unnamed, spoken of only in whispers. They trace their lineage back to Babylon, to Atlantis, to the watchers who fell from the sky and taught men forbidden knowledge. These beings, whether literal or symbolic, represent the moment when power crossed the threshold from divine to diabolical. In the Book of Enoch, they are called the Grigori angels who defied heaven to mate with humans and birth a race of giants. The Nephilim. They taught astrology, metallurgy, sorcery, and war. They corrupted the earth, and in doing so, set the stage for the flood, a divine reset. But what if some survived? What if their bloodline continued, diluted yet potent, hiding within royal houses and elite families? Is it coincidence that rulers throughout history have been obsessed with maintaining pure bloodlines? Why else would European monarchs intermarry to the point of deformity? Why else do secret societies demand genealogical proof before admitting members into their highest ranks? They are preserving something. Not just wealth or influence, but a spark, a code, a legacy written in the marrow of their bones. And it is this legacy that drives their obsession with the stars. Not the stars in poetry, but the constellations that form celestial calendars. Every major event, wars, assassinations, revolutions, aligns with specific planetary transits. Because to them, timing is everything. Magic, real magic, requires precision. Blood spilled on the wrong day is a waste. But blood spilled on the correct solstice, that's a sacrifice. Not theirs. Ours.